Hey, this is a video response to Sean Connor's interview of narrators, role-playing game narrators in particular, I guess. Uh, he asks, first of all, how did you get into RPGs? Well, I was introduced to fantasy literature as a really young child. My mother used to read me the series by Terry Brooks and The Pawn of Prophecy by David Eddings and that whole series. And Lord of the Rings from a really tender age, so I really bought into that and was introduced quite young to Warhammer Fantasy World, and we never really had enough money for me to get into the game and play. So what we would do is this friend of mine who really he collected the magazines, and I'd go and hang out with him, and he had tons of Legos, so we would kind of make our own game up out of these Lego pieces where the legs, everybody got so many amounts of legs, but how you built their bodies and how much armor you gave them and weapons depended on how well they, how much the dice would matter, how good they were in combat, if you will. And that was fun. But we were really into stories. We read a lot, so we started developing our own little adventures, our own little battle maps. And we would run these little homebrewed, no real solid mechanics. We used some dice for, elements of randomness, but we were pretty young. And that's really what got me into it, first of all. But it was mostly my mother telling me, reading all these books to me, and my friends who helped kind of indulge me in my fantasy, if you will. Next, he asks, how long have you been running games? Well, I've been running games for about 10 years, but that's on and off because there's not always people to play with, and sometimes motivation waxes and wanes. I'm a Pisces, so that happens from time to time. He also asks, what are your favorite systems to narrate? Well, I used to be really heavy into D&D. I played it lots. That's the system that introduced me into the game, and that's the first gaming system that I narrated. And my friends played really well, and it was tragic. The breakup of that group led to me not playing RPGs for several years. But recent events, I kept up with D&D, coming back into the third edition, like 3.5, kind of heavily running a few games for several months. And then I I moved with my girlfriend to this little town, and I tried to get a gaming group together. I was kind of coerced by one of these guys, and anyway, we won't get into that, but regardless of that fact, these recent events spoiled it for me. Plus, playing 4th edition made me realize that I kind of wanted to see something other than a D20 mechanic in a game, which is kind of why I started looking for other games, and I found Rogue Trader, which I did a little bit of there. I did a little bit of that game, and I like the way that the dice mechanics work. Pretty sweet with the 100 percentile, and it's quite in depth. Lots of options, a lot of tables. I've only run one game of that, and it was literally one session, maybe 3 or 4 hours, but I enjoyed that. And through that, this was after Warhammer 40K Rogue Trader, and after what was the other one? D&D 4th edition, which just made me realize the D20 mechanic was wearing old on me. I'd played it for so long, so I kept searching for a game, and I found Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, the 3rd edition that Fantasy Flight Games produces, and I fell in love with it immediately. I just like the way that it's like you're rolling the bones, you're divining from these series of dice and how the dice actually fit into the mechanics. I love that. Plus, Warhammer is one of my first experiences in a role-playing setting. We used to play in the world. Hero Quest was huge. I played Zargon all the time. For years, we ran Hero Quest when that first came over here to America. That is probably one of my favorite games, and it was right around the same time that I was getting into like 89 or 90, maybe 91, and I was getting into the Warhammer world quite heavily at that time. He also asks here that he wants to know how I would describe a narrating style, I guess, my personal narrating style. This is a hard one because I don't really like to toot on any sort of horn. Not that I really have a horn to toot on. Like I call myself the Strolling Bones for a reason, um, which we can discuss at a later date. But anyway, I would have to say that I like to be really immersive. I like to know my setting and I like to know where the story's going so I can describe things as well as possible to my players. It works really well in the Warhammer Fantasy roleplay because it just allows for more creativity. It's more story oriented as opposed to tactical combat, which D&D delivers. But I'm getting kind of tired of that. I've gotten tired of it actually. Anyway, I'd also like to say I really pay a lot of attention to continuity. I like to note things down to bring characters that they've met, even bit characters, back into the story to kind of make it feel real. Um, I do that to the best of my ability, and maybe that's why some of the games have ended because I put a little bit too much pressure on myself and try to develop it more than it needs to be. I've learned that over the years. Um, I'd also say I really like being player oriented. If you immerse your players in your world, you deliver continuity, and you make the game engaging to your players, then there's no way they won't be engaged and want to respond to what you create. And that's one reason why I'm heavily favored towards being on the PC side, which is another reason why I like Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. He asks here what makes a great narrator. Well, I would say having control, definitely more control than I have. I'm a little shaky when I'm delivering bit parts or trying to change the character of my voice and my mannerisms. And I have a hard time controlling my players in a sense that I kind of just let them run rampant and do whatever they want. But if they do something unrealistic, then they will more than likely die. Jumping in a river with full plate mail on, chances are you're gonna drown unless you have some help. I also think a great narrator, needs to be able to sculpt the story with humor, great knowledge of the material, and he has to also have a desire to do it. He has to make it happen because it's not going to happen unless he does it, or she. I would love it if my girlfriend got into the GMing. She's starting to play Warhammer Fantasy with me, and I think she's more indulging me in my fantasies than really playing the game, but she seems to enjoy it. He also says here, what's my best quality as a narrator? Well, I don't like to really say stuff like this, but I touched on that. I'd like to say I'm fair and I try to make it fun, and I like to come prepared. Also, I like to be as realistic as possible so that I can immerse my characters in clean and clear descriptions. Um, you know, anyway. What will my players say about me? Well, I've had so many different groups over the years, and my style has evolved. I guess you can call it a style. I'm not sure if that is a correct term for it, but anyway, reliable and lenient, I guess. I'd say that. I don't know. I let them get away with a lot of stuff. If they're creative and it's not over the top or overtly distracting from the, congruity or the immersion into the game, then I'll let them get away with pretty much anything. The dice always decide in the end, but I tend to favor the PCs, as I said before. And they'd probably tell you that I'm a bit of a pushover in favor of a good story. If there's an excellent story to be told, and once again, the characters used their creative talents to move the story along in unforeseen fashions, I am a big pushover. I'll let them get away with pretty much anything. I'm going to put this one away for now. I'm not going to touch on what makes a great player. I'd like to talk more about that in a different video. But he does ask here a couple things that really are important to me, like what things irritate me about the hobby. It kind of ties into the player aspect, I guess, but I don't like players who don't come prepared and don't want to play. They're there and being distracting, talking about things that have nothing to do with the storyline. That can irritate me because I can spend hours upon hours of time developing this stuff and just all I want to do is create a good experience and have a fun time, tell a story together as a team. And it really irks me and irritates me when people aren't there to play, talking on cell phones, you know. I also say that it takes so much time that I just feel like I have a lack of overall allotted time to be able to invest what I like into this hobby. That irritates me quite a bit. But that might be more life than the hobby itself, you know. And I'd have to say that the lapses in play are probably my most the thing that irritates me the most, I guess, about existing in this hobby paradigm. I just don't like how long it takes to play games sometimes. Living where I do and with the people I am, I mean, I enjoy immersing myself, into storytelling and reading and gathering information and knowledge and reading up on all sorts of subjects. However, I like to play the game. That's kind of why it's a conduit for my creativity, and I like to play it, and it really irritates me that I can't play more often. And when I do play, it's pretty much always the case that I will be the GM or GM narrator. And that can be a little frustrating because sometimes you just want to get out and play. The last thing he asks here would be, what piece of advice would I give a narrator? If I were to give a narrator one piece of advice, I would personally say that you need to be very, very descriptive. You don't have to go into detail and bog the story down with lots of descriptive words, but you need to be clear about where you're going with your story, one, and when you're in encounters, you need to be able to tell people, or your players, I should say, you need to make the situation seem vivid. You have to be clear and crisp and clean so that they understand what to do and therefore can react at a more rational level, I guess. Anyway, I'm running long on time here, so I'm going to stop, and that's what I have to say. I hope to be part of the community. Talk to you later.